Welcome to the dungeon. Welcome to the dungeon. Welcome to the dungeon. Yep, let's look at the dungeon. Yeah. Hello, welcome to the Bottled Imp, exploring the realms of fantasy. That's what we do. My name is Ken Boyter, and today, as you probably just noticed, we are going to go into the dungeon. So welcome to the dungeon. Now this is a little mini game. It's by iello, I think that's how you pronounce it. Yellow, there we go. And Oink Games. And it's designed by Masato. Yep, you can maybe check out the spelling of that to see if I've pronounced that correctly. And Paul Mayfayon. Those two designers. So let's do exactly what it says on the box. Let's go and welcome the dungeon to the work. Let's go in. So let's have a look at what you get in this tiny little box. Well, surprisingly, they have packed quite a lot into it, as you can see on the table here. You have 13 monster cards. There's these here, 13 of these monster cards. I'll show you those in a bit more detail a bit later on. You have 4 different characters that you'll be trying to take through into the dungeon. You also get 8 success cards, and again I'll show you these a little bit later on, although they're pretty straightforward. And you also get 4 character helping cards that tell you all about like how many monsters and their strength and what you need to defeat them. Plus you do get the lovely full colour illustrated rulebook that goes through all the rules that you need. And just on a point of interest here, one thing I really did like about the rulebook here is that at the end it says the clarifications, and it does go through each of the piece of equipment that you'll be using, hopefully, in a bit more detail. And I didn't notice that when I first played the game, so there was 1 or 2 that I was slightly confused at and thinking, have I played that correctly? Well, then I discovered the last 2 pages. So I do recommend, in general, if you do look at some rules when you're playing a board game, look at every page, because then that will cause you a tremendous joy when you're not frustrated in trying to work out a simple rule that you really should have known. That said, let's look at the object of the game. So, welcome to the dungeon. It's a 2 to 4 player game. Now, I've played it with 2, 3 and 4 players, and the 2 player game wasn't so good. And I'll get into that. I'll tell you why near the end of the review. The 3 player and the 4 player is probably, for me, that was the best way to play the game. Now, the object of the game is one player will actually be taking one of the characters, either the warrior, the mage, the rogue, or the barbarian, through the dungeon. And the object is to either survive the dungeon by beating all the monsters, because you'll be having equipment going in and they can beat the monsters, and you need to do that twice. Once you've beaten the dungeon once, you'll be getting one of these, which is a beautifully illustrated, very bright and jolly success card. If you beat the dungeon twice, then you've won the game. It's that simple. Equally, you can win by kind of not going into the dungeon and letting other people fail. So if you fail twice, you then are out of the game. So obviously if it's a 2 player and somebody fails twice, it doesn't have to be in a row, by the way, then they're out of the game and you have won by default. So that's a kind of more sneaky way of playing. So in a way, it's a little bit like chicken, where you're kind of wondering, should you take one of the characters through? Is the character strong enough? Or should you just not take it, pass, and let the other player, fight all the monsters to see if they can survive? Now, you do also get, as I said, one of these character help cards, which here it lists how many characters there are, how many monsters that are in the actual pack, and these little symbols are what piece of equipment can defeat them. Plus, it also tells you how strong each character is. So here, the big demon, that's strength of 9, whereas these little goblins, they've only got a strength of 1. And if you fail, then you flip that over. So you put it face up in front of you on the white side. Then if you fail once, you flip it over to denote that you failed once, so people can keep a track of that. And again, if you fail again, you flip it back over, but you're out the game. So let's have a look at the monsters. Now, as you can probably see, everything about this is beautifully illustrated. And it's slightly comic monsters. The artwork is slightly comic, but detailed enough and gritty enough as well. So they've done it, for me, they've done a really good balancing act. It's not childish. So I love this artwork. It's really cool. Now, as you can see, just to go through the monster, that's the big 1 there is the strength. So that's in the corner. There's a 3, there's a 5. And here, you may be able to see, that's the symbol of a torch. And so therefore, this monster here is automatically defeated by a torch. So if your character, when you go through the dungeon, still has the torch, you'll be able to defeat that one instantly. Equally, this one here, you can have a chalice that can beat it, or a torch. This one is the chalice, that one's the hammer, that one's the hood, or the chalice, and that one's a sort of demon thing. I'm not quite sure, but we'll look at that on the actual piece of equipment. And so therefore, you just match up which symbols can beat which monster. Now, how the turn goes is everybody that's playing is in the running to take one of these characters through the dungeon. So you determine which, you just pick randomly, I think, but check that out in the rules. Pick which one you want to take through the dungeon. I think the way we did it is we rolled dice to see which one we would take through the dungeon. So you would then place just one character, either the warrior, the mage, the rogue, or the barbarian, on the table. And to start off with, so let's say we're going with the warrior, so you would take all those away, you wouldn't have them laid out, so you just have the warrior laid out with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of equipment. Now, to begin with, that warrior has all its equipment. And as you can see, it's got HP, so this warrior has an HP hit points of 3. And as you can see here, the knight shield also has 3 hit points. And this one here, plate armor, has 5 hit points. So you add all of those up, and that is your starting hit point. Now, each monster, as I said, had a strength. So this one, for example, is 9. So if you were to lose against this monster, you didn't have a piece of equipment to beat it, your character would take 9 hit points, and that might be enough to kill it, obviously. Now, the way a turn goes is if it's your turn, you have a couple of options. One, you can pass, which means you're not going to take that character through the dungeon. You're out for that little round, and then you watch someone else go through the dungeon with the character. Or you can take a monster card. You will look at it, and it's only you that looks at it, and you decide whether or not that monster is going to be in the dungeon. So if it is, and you think, yeah, actually, we have that corresponding piece of equipment, then you would probably want to put it into the dungeon. You don't have to, though, but you would put it in front there, and everybody will do that. They will either pass or decide whether or not a monster goes into the dungeon. If it goes into the dungeon, you just start putting them onto a pile, and when everybody has passed and there's only one person left, they're the person that's going to take, in this case, the warrior through the dungeon. Now, there'll be a pile of monster cards, and therefore you flip them over to see if you've defeated them. But the other thing you can do on your go is if you pick one of the monsters and you think, actually, I don't think we can defeat that. For example, that's the hammer. Now, the warrior hasn't actually got the hammer. So you know that you're going to take 5 hit points, which means, potentially you could die. So obviously the more hit points you take, the lower your hit points are, and then eventually you may die. So you may decide that you want to keep this particular monster out. So you simply put it to one side away from the rest of the cards. But there's a penalty with that, because if you put a monster out of the dungeon, you have to take one of the piece of equipment away from the warrior, from the character. So again, you kind of think, well, which piece of equipment shall I take away? Now, that's up to you. So you might just take away the torch, for example, and then you just simply put it on top of the monster, and that is out of that little round. Now, consequently, this is where the chicken comes involved, not an actual chicken, but the game of chicken, because, say for example, someone else decided that they were going to put a monster out of the dungeon, they would take another bit of equipment, and someone else might decide to do the same, and then eventually you might be left with just 3 bits of equipment, or 1 bit of equipment, or no equipment at all. In that case, you're probably not going to survive the dungeon, because there'll be monsters that you then have to fight. So that's where you decide at some point you may want to start stitching up the other players and sort of go, actually, yeah, I'm going to take that monster out, take a really crucial bit of equipment, and then on my next go, I'm going to pass. And hopefully you'll get that opportunity, because if other people pass, you may stitch yourself up and actually go, I'm going to now take a character that's pretty weak into a dungeon that's full of monsters. So that's where you have to decide the strategy. So you can start setting people up, or equally you could start putting all the monsters you know can't be defeated into the dungeon and then pass. So that's when it's kind of brinkmanship. When do I decide, I want to take this character through, or when do you decide I'm going to pass and let them hopefully fail? So that really is the strategy. It is a light, very light strategy, and that is kind of the fun bit of the game to begin with. The second bit of the fun is, once you have your monster deck, so let's say, all of those are the ones that you've discarded, there might be a time where all the monsters are in the dungeon and you've got all the equipment. That may happen. But once you've decided everyone's passed apart from one person, that person then takes the warrior or whichever character is into the dungeon. And then you simply just turn over the card. So then you would turn it over and say, all right, this sort of monster dragon type thing. Have I got that piece of equipment? Yes, look, I've got the dragon spear. It's the same symbol. Yes, so simply discard the card. You've beaten that dragon. Then you flip over and go, right, it's I don't know what that is, some sort of rock monster. It's the hammer. We haven't got the hammer, so we take 5 damage points. Now, as if it was this, for example, I've only got 3 left. The warrior's only got 3 hit points left. So in that case, I would have lost. And then I would simply just flip my card to the red. And then if I lose another time, then yeah, I'm out of the game. And that is how to play it. It's very simple. My thoughts on the game is, it's a lot of fun. It is good. And as I said, it's better to play it with 3 or 4 players, because the 2-player one, 50% of the cards that have been put out, because you're the ones that are taking the monsters out. Obviously, you don't know what they've put into the dungeon, but you know 50% of the cards. Whereas obviously if there's 3 or 4 players, you know less of what monsters are into the dungeon, so it becomes slightly more tension-ridden and a bit more strategic. Should I pass or what's that song? Should I stay or should I leave? Yeah, it's pretty much that. The artwork, as I say previously, it's beautiful. Every card is so well designed, so beautifully drawn. The artwork, the flavour and the tone of the artwork is a great mixture, as I say. The components are really good. These tiles, for example, are really thick card, really chunky, just adds a bit of quality. Plus they put a little bit of spot UV on it, a little lamination over some of the card, which again adds a bit of quality to it. Yeah, as I say, these cards are nice and thick. The rule book is nicely explained and full colour. And I bought this at the UK Games Expo, and I don't regret it, because I'd seen Tom Vassell and the Dice Tower review it. It looked fun. And I wanted a game that was not too heavy, and this certainly isn't heavy, but was a quick game. And you can really rattle through this. 4-player, you could probably do in 30 minutes, 50 minutes, maybe if you're mucking about and making cups of tea and that type of thing. But overall, it's a great little filler game. It's a mini game. Love the theme. I would definitely check it out.